When Linda Patterson tried to break into my cabin at 2 a.m. with her HOA master key, she had no idea my wife was a federal prosecutor who'd been waiting 3 years for this exact moment. The sound of metal scraping against metal as Linda fumbles with her illegally copied key in my front door lock. Her flashlight beam sweeps frantically across my windows like some kind of discount burglar. She's muttering under her breath about HOA rights and property inspections. At 2 in the morning, mind you. Meanwhile, my wife Sarah is already on the phone with 911, her voice calm as ice. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Mitchell, reporting a breaking and entering in progress. The suspect is trespassing on federal property. Linda's panicked voice cuts through the night. This is HOA business. I have every right to be here. Sarah's response? Ma'am, you're committing a federal crime. Stay exactly where you are. What would you do if your HOA president tried breaking into your home in the middle of the night? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how many of you have dealt with power-hungry HOA Karens. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story starts 3 years earlier, with the smell of pine sap and the sound of my grandfather's old pickup truck crunching up our gravel driveway for the last time. I'm Jake, and I'm a 34-year-old disabled veteran who inherited my grandfather's 40-acre ranch in what used to be the middle of nowhere. Keywords there. Used to be. See, when Grandpa bought this land back in 1987, the closest neighbor was 5 miles away. Now we've got cookie-cutter McMansions sprouting up like weeds. And somehow, our property got swept into something called the Pinewood Falls Homeowners Association. My wife Sarah is a federal prosecutor who specializes in civil rights violations. Smart woman, tougher than a $2 steak, and she's got zero patience for bullies. We met at a VA hospital where she was investigating healthcare fraud. I was there trying to figure out how to live with chronic pain from an IED blast that rearranged my spine in ways that weren't in the original blueprint. The ranch became our sanctuary. Grandpa had set it up off grids. Solar panels that hum quietly in the morning sun, a well that pulls sweet water from 200 feet down, propane tanks that smell faintly of that distinctive gas leak scent even when they're working perfectly. I added wheelchair ramps and adapted the workshop where I do woodworking therapy. There's something about the feel of smooth oak under your hands that quiets the noise in your head, you know? Then Linda Patterson moved to town. Linda's 52, works in real estate, and drives through the neighborhood like she's conducting a military inspection. She moved here 5 years ago from some city subdivision and immediately decided our little community needed improvement. Within 6 months, she'd pushed through HOA formation with promises of protecting property values and maintaining standards. What she really meant was getting rid of anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Her first target? The solar panels Grandpa installed in 1995. Apparently they were unsightly and lowered the aesthetic value of the neighborhood, never mind that they were grandfathered in by about 20 years. Then came the complaints about our commercial-grade propane tanks. Commercial grade? They're the same tanks every rural property uses, but apparently Linda thought they looked too industrial. The violation notice arrived on a Tuesday, certified mail. Because of course it was certified mail, the postal truck rumbled up our driveway like it was delivering a court summons, which, in a way, it was. $200 0 cents per day fine, the letter read, until unsightly modifications are removed from property, 30 days to comply. I pulled out Grandpa's deed and all the grandfathering documentation. Everything was legal, everything was properly filed. Took it straight to Linda's office in town, thinking this was just a misunderstanding. Grandfathering doesn't apply to new installations, she said, not even looking up from her computer screen. These modifications weren't approved by the current HOA board. Ma'am, these panels were installed 28 years ago. Your HOA has existed for 6 months. That's when she looked up and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't confusion or even stubbornness. It was calculation. Property values are everyone's responsibility, Mr. Mitchell. I'm sure a veteran like yourself understands the importance of following rules. The way she said veteran, like it was something distasteful she had to scrape off her shoe. That's when I knew this wasn't about solar panels or propane tanks. This was about her deciding who belonged in her neighborhood and who didn't. Sarah was in her home office when I got back, reviewing case files. I handed her the violation notice, and I watched her knuckles go white as she gripped the paper. Honey, she said, her prosecutor voice coming out, I think Linda Patterson just made a very expensive mistake. Linda's next move came exactly 1 week later, another certified letter, Another rumble of the postal truck up our driveway. This time the envelope was thicker. A mandatory inter-inspection notice, it read in bold letters that practically screamed at me from the page. According to Linda's letter, an anonymous neighbor had reported potential health and safety violations inside our cabin. The HOA was demanding a full interior inspection within 72 hours, or we'd face $500 0 cents per day in fine. Sarah read the letter twice, then set it down with the kind of careful precision she usually reserved for handling evidence in federal court cases. "Jake, this is a Fourth Amendment violation waiting to happen," she said. "HOA covenants regulate exterior property use, not interior spaces. She has absolutely no legal right to demand entry into our home. But here's the thing about bullies. They count on you not knowing your rights." I spent the next day digging through every single page of the original HOA covenant documents, all 47 pages of mind-numbing legal jargon that would make a tax attorney weep. And guess what I found? Absolutely nothing about interior inspections. The HOA's authority ended at our front door. Knowledge nugget time. Most HOA covenants only cover exterior modifications and common area usage. They cannot legally demand access to the inside of your home without a court order or genuine emergency. Always read your actual covenant documents, not just the threats they send you. Our neighbor Tom stopped by that evening. Tom's 73, retired from practicing law for 40 years, and he's got the kind of institutional memory that makes Linda nervous. He was sipping coffee on our porch when he dropped this little bombshell. "You know, Jake, Linda tried this exact same thing with the Henderson family last year. They got so tired of fighting her, they sold their place for $30,000 under market value. Funny thing is, Linda's real estate company handled the sale." The smell of Tom's black coffee mixed with the evening pine air as that information sank in. This wasn't about property values or neighborhood standards. This was a systematic campaign to force people out so Linda could profit from the chaos. But Linda wasn't done escalating. 2 days after the inspection deadline passed, with us politely declining to let her rifle through our underwear drawer, she pulled her next stunt. At 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday, 3 fire trucks screamed up our driveway, sirens wailing, red lights flashing like we were hosting the world's worst rave. "Report of a propane leak," the fire chief told me as I wheeled out in my pajamas. "Immediate danger to neighboring properties." Listening. 20 minutes and a thorough inspection later, the verdict was clear. No leak, equipment in perfect condition, everything up to code. But here's the kicker. The emergency response fee for a false alarm? $300. 0 cents. Charged directly to us. "Well," Linda said when the fire chief called her with the all clear, "it could have been dangerous. Better safe than sorry." The fire chief's expression told me everything I needed to know about how often Linda had cried wolf in this neighborhood. That evening, Sarah was on her laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and a notepad covered in her precise handwriting. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Building a pattern," she said without looking up. "Every interaction, every false claim, every financial penalty she's imposed on you, and probably others. Harassment isn't just about individual incidents, Jake. It's about demonstrating intentional, systematic behavior designed to interfere with someone's civil rights." She showed me her notes. Dates, times, amounts, witnesses, 3 weeks of documentation that painted a clear picture of escalating harassment. "In federal court, pattern evidence is everything," Sarah explained. "1 incident is a misunderstanding. 3 incidents might be coincidence, but a documented campaign of harassment targeting a disabled veteran? That's when the Justice Department starts paying attention." I started installing security cameras the next day. Nothing fancy, just basic home security equipment that covered our property boundaries. In our state, you can record anything visible from your own property without anyone's consent, and I had a feeling we were going to need every frame of footage. Tom stopped by while I was mounting the last camera near the workshop. "Smart move," he said, handing me a screwdriver. "Linda doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become the star of her own documentary about HOA abuse." The cameras were rolling 24/7 by the end of the week. Sarah had her documentation system running like a federal investigation, and Linda was just getting started. But so were we. Linda's next escalation happened on a Tuesday morning, and I woke up to the unmistakable smell of diesel fuel where it absolutely should not be, floating on top of our well water. Sarah was already up, standing in our kitchen holding a glass of what used to be crystal clear drinking water and was now tinted with an oily rainbow sheen that caught the morning light like a twisted prism. "Someone contaminated our well," she said, her federal prosecutor voice cutting through the morning quiet like a blade. By noon, we'd discovered the full scope of the sabotage. Our propane lines had been accidentally damaged during what looked like landscaping work. The power lines running to our solar array had been cut clean through with what was definitely not a landscaping tool. And that diesel smell? Someone had dumped at least 5 gallons directly into our well housing. All of this happened within a 48-hour window when we'd been visiting Sarah's parents in the city. No witnesses, no obvious evidence, just thousands of dollars in damage and the very real possibility that our water supply was ruined. But here's what Linda didn't count on. Those security cameras I'd installed were motion-activated and battery-power-powed. Even with our power cut, they kept rolling. The footage was beautiful in its clarity. A contractor's truck, license plate clearly visible, pulling up to our property at 11:30 p.m. 2 men with flashlights systematically cutting our power lines. The same truck returning the next evening, this time with what looked like jerry cans of fuel heading straight for our well. Sarah pulled up the contractor registration database on her laptop. The truck belonged to Pine Valley Maintenance Services, a company registered to one Linda Patterson. "Well," Sarah said, scrolling through the business registration documents, "this just became a criminal case." Knowledge nugget time. Environmental contamination of water supplies is a federal crime under the Safe Drinking Water Act, carrying penalties up to $37,500.00 per day plus criminal charges. It doesn't matter if it's just diesel fuel or if the contamination was accidental, poisoning someone's water supply is serious business. Tom arrived within an hour of Sarah's phone call and he brought backup. Turns out, when you've practiced law in a small town for 4 decades, you know people. People like the county environmental inspector, the state water quality specialist, and a very interested investigator from the EPA's Criminal Enforcement Division. By Thursday morning, our property looked like a CSI episode. Water samples, soil samples, photography documentation, and enough federal agents to staff a small embassy. The diesel contamination was confirmed, the source was traced, and Linda's contractor was facing charges that could put him away for years. But Linda wasn't backing down. If anything, the federal attention seemed to make her more desperate. That weekend, she called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda? A special assessment of $15,000, 0 cents per property for critical infrastructure upgrades to prevent environmental hazards in the neighborhood. $15,000 per property due in 30 days. The meeting was held in the community center, and you could feel the tension the moment you walked in. Folding chairs creaking under nervous residents, the smell of burnt coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long, and Linda at the front of the room with a PowerPoint presentation that would have made a timeshare salesman proud. "Recent events have shown us the critical need for infrastructure modernization," she announced to the room of about 40 homeowners. "This assessment will ensure every property meets current safety standards." What she didn't say was that most of these residents were on fixed incomes, retirees who'd bought their homes specifically because they were affordable, people who couldn't just write a check for 15 grand without facing foreclosure. Maria, who runs the local diner and has lived here for 20 years, raised her hand. "Linda, I can't afford $15,000. None of us can. What happens if we can't pay?" Linda's smile was pure predator. The HOA would be forced to place liens on non-compliant properties, for the safety of the community, of course. That's when Tom stood up. At 73, he doesn't move fast, but when he talks, people listen. "Linda, I've reviewed the HOA bylaws. This assessment requires a 2/3 majority vote of all property owners, not just those present. We don't have a quorum for this kind of financial decision." Linda's face went through several interesting color changes. "The board has emergency powers." "No," Tom interrupted. "The board has emergency powers for actual emergencies. Trying to extort $15,000 from your neighbors isn't an emergency, it's racketeering." The room went dead silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah leaned over and whispered to me, "She's not just harassing us anymore, Jake. She's running a protection racket." And that's when I realized Linda wasn't trying to get us to comply with her rules. She was trying to force us all out so she could buy our properties cheap and flip them to developers. This wasn't about property values, this was about property theft. Linda's response to Tom's legal challenge was swift and vicious. Within 48 hours, she'd filed 3 separate police reports, claiming I was threatening neighbors and stockpiling weapons at the ranch. The first welfare check happened on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 deputies knocked on my door with that careful politeness cops use when they're not sure if they're dealing with a genuine threat or a neighborhood nut job. "Sir, we've received reports of threatening behavior and possible weapons violations," Deputy Martinez said, glancing down at his notepad. "Anonymous caller expressed concern about a dangerous veteran in the area." I invited them in immediately. Nothing says I have nothing to hide like opening your doors to law enforcement. They walked through my adapted workshop, saw my woodworking tools, my physical therapy equipment, and my collection of exactly 2 hunting rifles that were properly stored and registered. "This is embarrassing," Deputy Rodriguez said after their inspection. "Whoever called this in either has a serious misunderstanding about what constitutes a threat, or they're deliberately wasting our time." The second welfare check came 3 days later. Different deputies, same anonymous tip, same results. By the third check, the officers were openly annoyed. "Mr. Mitchell, we're going to document these calls as harassment," Deputy Martinez told me. "Someone's using emergency services to intimidate you, and that's a crime." But Linda wasn't done with her campaign of lies. She had taken to social media, posting vague warnings about dangerous individuals in the neighborhood and concerning activity at all hours. Never naming me directly. She wasn't quite that stupid, but making it clear who she was talking about. Sarah screenshot every post. Date, time, content, engagement metrics, building that pattern documentation like the federal prosecutor she was. Then Linda played her most despicable card yet. It arrived on a Friday because bullies love to ruin your weekends. A cease and desist letter from Patterson Legal Services claiming I was harassing and intimidating Linda and threatening criminal charges if I didn't stop my campaign of harassment against her. The letter specifically mentioned my disability benefits, suggesting they could be affected if criminal charges were filed. The threat was clear: back down or lose the medical support that keeps me functional. Sarah read the letter once, set it down, and did something I'd only seen her do twice in our marriage. She smiled. Not a happy smile, the kind of smile a shark makes right before it reminds you that you're in its ocean. "Jake? Honey," she said, pulling out her phone. "Linda just committed a federal crime." Knowledge nugget time. Threatening to interfere with someone's disability benefits as retaliation is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and can result in federal civil rights charges. It's also considered witness intimidation if you're involved in any legal proceedings, which we now were thanks to the EPA investigation. The timing was perfect if you believe in cosmic justice. This was PTSD Awareness Week, and the local veterans group had planned a community barbecue at Maria's Diner. When word got out about Linda's threats against a disabled veteran, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Maria's Diner became the unofficial headquarters for what Tom started calling Operation Neighborhood Watch. The coffee pot was always brewing, maps were spread across tables showing property boundaries and legal rights, and veterans from 3 counties started showing up to offer support. "This isn't just about you anymore, Jake," said Bill, a Vietnam vet who'd driven 2 hours to help. "This is about standing up to bullies who think they can push around people who've already sacrificed enough." Sarah was building her federal case like she was constructing a cathedral. Every piece of evidence carefully placed, every legal precedent researched and documented. 47 incidents over 18 months. 12 neighbors willing to testify about Linda's pattern of harassment. 3 federal agencies now investigating various aspects of Linda's behavior. In federal court, Sarah explained to the group gathered at Maria's, "We don't just prove individual crimes. We prove systematic civil rights violations. Linda's not just harassing Jake, she's targeting him specifically because of his disability status." The legal precedent was solid. Similar cases had resulted in settlements over $50,000, 0 cents, plus injunctive relief and civil rights monitoring. Linda was looking at financial ruin and possible prison time. But Sarah's strategy was more elegant than just winning in court. She was giving Linda enough rope to hang herself completely. "The beauty of dealing with narcissistic bullies," Sarah said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "is that they can't help escalating. Linda's frustration is going to make her do something spectacularly stupid." We didn't have to wait long. That night, Linda made a post on the neighborhood Facebook page that would have made her lawyer weep if she'd been smart enough to hire one. Some people don't belong in decent neighborhoods. They bring violence and chaos wherever they go. Time to take direct action. The post was screenshot by 6 different neighbors before Linda deleted it, but on the internet, nothing ever really disappears. Sarah printed it out and added it to her evidence file. Direct action, she said, highlighting Linda's words. That sounds like a threat to me. Tom's discovery came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, delivered via email with a subject line that made my phone buzz me awake. You need to see this now. The attachment was a scanned document from 1987, the original Pinewood Falls HOA formation paperwork that Tom had dug out of the county records archive. Most of it was standard legal boilerplate, but buried on page 23 was a clause that changed everything. Emergency access provisions require formal court order except in cases of immediate life-threatening danger, as determined by licensed emergency personnel. Let me translate that from lawyer speak. Linda's master key? The one she'd been threatening to use for inspections? She had no legal right to it whatsoever. The HOA board couldn't just decide to walk into people's homes. They needed a judge's signature, period. But that wasn't even the best part. Sarah had been conducting her own investigation into Linda's finances, and what she found made the water contamination look like jaywalking. Linda wasn't just embezzling HOA funds. She was running a sophisticated property flipping scheme that would have impressed organized crime. The money trail was beautiful in its criminal simplicity. HOA fees collected from residents were being funneled into shell companies controlled by Linda. Those companies would then buy properties from homeowners who'd been harassed into selling below market value. The properties were flipped to developers for massive profits, with Linda pocketing the difference. Total unreported income over 3 years, $340,000, 0 cents. The IRS is going to be very interested in this, Sarah said, highlighting numbers on her laptop screen. Tax evasion on this scale isn't just civil penalties, it's federal prison time. But Linda was in deeper trouble than just tax fraud. Sarah's forensic accounting revealed that Linda was leveraged to her eyeballs in real estate investments. She owed $340,000, 0 cents, to various lenders, and her developer partner was demanding payment on a 60-day deadline. Translation: Linda needed 5 more forced property sales to avoid bankruptcy. That's when the second bombshell hit. Tom had been having coffee with Harold at the hardware store. You know, the kind of small-town conversation that happens over the smell of motor oil and metal shavings? When Harold mentioned something interesting. That Patterson woman's been in here 3 times asking about getting keys copied, Harold said. Last time she brought in a ring of about 12 keys, said they were for HOA maintenance access. I told her I couldn't copy keys without written authorization from the property owners. But Linda hadn't given up. She'd found another hardware store 2 towns over, one where nobody knew her face or cared about proper authorization. Sarah's eyes lit up when Tom shared this information. She's been planning this for months, Jake. The master key, the harassment campaign, the financial pressure, it's all been building toward her final move. The beautiful thing was that Linda had no idea we knew any of this. As far as she was concerned, she was dealing with a disabled veteran who was too tired to fight and a prosecutor who was too busy with federal cases to focus on neighborhood drama. She couldn't have been more wrong. Criminal Law 101, Sarah explained to the group gathered at Maria's diner that evening. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Linda's desperation is going to make her do something incredibly stupid, and when she does, we'll be ready. Knowledge nugget time. Financial crimes always leave paper trails. Bank records, property transfers, tax filings. If someone's harassing you while simultaneously profiting from property sales in your area, follow the money. Financial motivation can turn simple harassment into federal racketeering charges. The community power shift was immediate and dramatic. Half the neighborhood had figured out Linda's game and wanted her gone. Tom's legal connections had provided us with a retired federal judge who agreed to expedited hearings when the time came. Maria's diner had become the unofficial resistance headquarters, with neighbors coordinating surveillance and documentation. We'd gone from being Linda's victims to being the investigators building her prosecution. She just didn't know it yet. Maria's diner after closing time became our war room. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the lingering aroma of that day's meatloaf special, while legal documents and financial records covered every table like we were planning the invasion of Normandy. Sarah had her laptop open, surrounded by 3 federal investigators who'd driven down from the state capitol. Tom was coordinating with his network of retired legal professionals. Maria was managing communications with an encrypted group chat that now included 47 neighbors. And me? I was making sure our technology could capture every moment of Linda's inevitable final mistake. "Here's how this works," Sarah announced to our assembled team, her federal prosecutor voice cutting through the diner's evening quiet. "We have 3 separate federal investigations running parallel tracks. First track, civil rights violations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Linda's systematic harassment of a disabled veteran, documented over 18 months with clear financial motivation. Federal hate crime charges carry 10-year minimum sentences." Second track, environmental crimes. The water contamination wasn't just property damage, it was deliberate poisoning of a federally protected water source. The EPA was pursuing criminal charges that could result in 20 years and $250,000, 0 cents in fine. Third track, financial crimes. Tax evasion, embezzlement, racketeering, wire fraud. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division was building a case that would strip Linda of every asset she'd acquired through her property flipping scheme. "The beauty of federal charges," Sarah explained, "is that they stack. Linda isn't facing one crime, she's facing a pattern of criminal enterprise that falls under RICO statutes." Tom spread out a timeline across 2 tables, marking every incident with red pins, like a detective solving a serial case. "The key is coordination," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "We let Linda dig herself deeper while we document everything. When she finally makes her move, and she will, every federal agency will be ready to respond simultaneously." Knowledge nugget time. RICO statutes were designed to prosecute organized crime, but they apply to any ongoing criminal enterprise. If someone commits multiple related crimes as part of a systematic scheme, federal prosecutors can charge them under racketeering laws, which carry much harsher penalties than individual charges. My job was ensuring we captured everything on camera. I'd upgraded our security system with night vision cameras, motion sensors, and audio recording equipment that would make a surveillance expert jealous. Every angle of our property was covered, with automated backup to cloud storage that Linda couldn't access or destroy. Maria had transformed her diner into a 24/7 communication hub. The encrypted group chat meant that any suspicious activity would be reported instantly to multiple witnesses. She'd also established a legal defense fund, neighbors contributing money to ensure we had the resources to fight Linda's harassment campaign indefinitely. "The community response has been incredible," Maria said, checking messages on her phone. "People are driving by your property every hour, taking notes, recording anything unusual. Linda can't make a move without 6 witnesses documenting it." But our ace in the hole was the bait strategy. Sarah had calculated Linda's psychology perfectly. She's desperate, leverage beyond her means, and facing bankruptcy if she can't force more property sales. Her development partner is demanding payment in 60 days, and she knows we're building a case against her. The plan was elegant. We'd leave the cabin undefended during Linda's known patrol hours, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when she typically drove through the neighborhood looking for violations. Our security system would capture everything, neighbors would be positioned as witnesses, and Sarah would be ready to receive any emergency calls. "She thinks she holds all the cards," Sarah continued, "but we've turned her desperation into our advantage. When she finally uses that illegal master key, she'll be committing multiple federal crimes in front of multiple cameras with multiple witnesses." Tom had coordinated with a retired federal judge who'd agreed to expedited hearings. "Judge Morrison has seen cases like this before," Tom explained. "Property harassment schemes targeting veterans, systematic civil rights violations, financial crimes masquerading as neighborhood governance. She's not sympathetic to bullies who hide behind HOA authority." The media strategy was already in place. Local news had been briefed about the environmental crimes investigation. Social media influencers in the veteran community were standing by to amplify the story. Linda's downfall would be public, complete, and permanent. "Financial warfare is the final piece," Sarah said, pulling up Linda's asset documentation. "The moment she's arrested, we'll have seizure warrants ready for execution. Every property, every bank account, every asset acquired through her criminal enterprise gets frozen immediately." As our planning session wrapped up near midnight, the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the coffee pot gurgling through its final cycle, Sarah delivered the most satisfying news of all. Linda doesn't know it yet, but she's already lost. Every move she's made for the past 18 months has been building our case. Now we just wait for her to complete her own prosecution. The trap was set, the evidence was overwhelming, the federal agents were ready. All we needed was for Linda to be Linda, arrogant, desperate, and stupid enough to think she could break into a federal prosecutor's home without consequences. Linda's desperation manifested in the ugliest possible way. I woke up Thursday morning to find our cabin's exterior covered in spray-painted messages that would have made a hate crime investigator take notes. "Freaks go home," and "welfare cheats not welcome," in dripping red letters across our front door. But that wasn't the worst of it. Sitting on our front porch like some kind of twisted welcome mat was a dead possum that had clearly been placed there intentionally. The smell hit me before I even opened the door, that sickly sweet stench of decay mixed with the crisp morning air. Sarah's response was ice-cold professional fury. She photographed everything from multiple angles, documented the GPS coordinates, and called her contacts at the FBI's domestic terrorism unit before she even called the local police. "Hate crimes against disabled veterans fall under federal jurisdiction," she explained to the responding officers. "This isn't vandalism, it's domestic terrorism." Our upgraded security system had captured everything in beautiful 4K detail. Linda's contractor truck arriving at 3:17 a.m. Two figures in dark clothing systematically defacing our property. The same truck returning 20 minutes later with what was obviously a dead animal from the roadside. But here's where Linda's arrogance really shone through. She thought she was being clever by using contractors to do her dirty work. What she didn't realize was that her anonymous helpers were more than happy to sell her out when federal agents came knocking. The contractor's confession was music to Sarah's ears. "Linda Patterson paid me $5,000 to send a message to the veteran who was causing trouble in the neighborhood," he told investigators. "She specifically said to make it look threatening because disabled people scare easily." Mini twist alert. While Linda was orchestrating nighttime vandalism, she was also working the daytime corruption angle. She'd contacted a county commissioner, some good old boy who owed her favors from previous real estate deals, and asked him to influence the ongoing environmental investigation. Commissioner Bradley actually called the EPA investigator handling our case. "Now, I'm not saying you should drop this thing," he said, not realizing the call was being recorded, "but Linda Patterson is an important businesswoman in our community. Maybe we could work something out." What Bradley didn't know was that Sarah had already briefed the EPA about potential corruption attempts. The investigator kept him talking for 15 minutes, getting enough evidence to add public corruption charges to Linda's growing list of federal crimes. Meanwhile, Linda was doubling down on her social media campaign. Her Facebook posts escalated from vague warnings to explicit threats. "Some people think they can hide behind their disability while terrorizing decent families. Time to show them what real Americans think about freeloaders." She tagged the posts with local business pages, veteran organizations, and disability advocacy groups, apparently not realizing that documented threats against protected classes constitute federal hate crimes with mandatory sentencing guidelines. Maria's Diner became the unofficial monitoring station for Linda's digital meltdown. Neighbors were screenshot every post, comment, and interaction. The documentation was so thorough that Sarah's FBI contacts started calling it the most well-documented hate crime case they'd ever seen. "She's not just threatening you anymore," Tom observed, scrolling through Linda's latest rants. "She's threatening anyone who supports you. That's conspiracy to violate civil rights, a completely separate federal charge." But Linda's most spectacular mistake was trying to bribe Officer Martinez, the deputy who'd responded to her false welfare check calls. "Look, Deputy Martinez," Linda said during what she thought was a casual conversation outside the grocery store, "maybe we could discuss a contribution to the Police Benevolent Fund. You know, to show appreciation for keeping our community safe from undesirable elements." She handed him an envelope containing $500, 0 cents in cash, and a note suggesting that future calls about the veteran situation might not require immediate response. Officer Martinez immediately reported the attempted bribery to Internal Affairs, turned over the evidence, and agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. Linda had just added police corruption and obstruction of justice to her charges. "The beautiful thing about narcissists," Sarah explained to our evening strategy session, "is that they can't stop escalating. Every crime Linda commits makes her more desperate, and every desperate act leads to bigger crimes. The FBI Domestic Terrorism Unit had officially opened a case file. The Public Corruption Task Force was investigating Linda's political connections. The Environmental Crimes Division was preparing criminal indictments. And the IRS Criminal Investigation Division was ready to seize every asset Linda had acquired through her property scheme. "We're not just building a case anymore," Sarah said, reviewing the latest evidence reports. "We're watching a criminal enterprise collapse in real time." Linda's development deal deadline was in 72 hours. Her financial leverage was approaching critical mass. Her political connections were abandoning her faster than rats leaving a sinking ship. She was going to make one final desperate move, and when she did, every federal law enforcement agency in 3 states would be ready. Linda's final plan crystallized on a Friday afternoon when Harold from the hardware store called Tom with urgent news she found someone to copy those keys. Apparently, Linda had driven 2 counties over to a big box store where nobody knew her face or cared about proper authorization. She'd walked out with copies of 12 different house keys, including one that looked suspiciously like our front door lock. She told the kid behind the counter they were for emergency HOA maintenance, Harold reported. Paid cash, no questions asked. Sarah's response was swift and strategic. "Perfect. Now we have premeditation." For the next 48 hours, Linda conducted surveillance on our property like she was planning a military operation. Our security cameras caught her driving by every few hours, always at different times, always slowing down to study our routine. She was learning our patterns, looking for the perfect moment to strike. The smell of her car's exhaust would linger in our driveway after each pass, that distinct, burnt oil scent of a vehicle that needed maintenance but was being driven hard anyway. Desperation has a smell, and Linda reeked of it. Tuesday night, she made her first test run. At 11:47 p.m., our motion sensors detected her approaching the cabin on foot, flashlight in hand, moving through the trees like some kind of suburban commando. She got within 10 feet of our front door before our neighbor Tom's porch light came on, and she retreated. "She's practicing," Sarah observed, reviewing the footage, "testing our response times, checking our security coverage. She'll be back." Thursday evening brought the real attempt. Linda arrived at 2:17 a.m. in her car, engine running, headlights off. She approached our cabin with a flashlight, a crowbar, and her illegally copied keyring. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the night air as she tried key after key in our front door lock. But here's the beautiful part. Jake had changed the locks 3 days earlier, right after Harold's warning call. Linda's copied keys were useless pieces of metal that fit nothing. Mini twist moment. Instead of retreating when the keys failed, Linda's desperation drove her to attempt window entry. She used the crowbar to try prying open our bathroom window, then moved to the bedroom window, making enough noise to wake half the county. That's when Sarah made the call that would end Linda's criminal career. 959, what's your emergency? This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Mitchell at 47 Pine Ridge Road. I'm reporting a breaking and entering in progress. The suspect is attempting to enter my home using burglary tools. I need immediate law enforcement response. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? Negative. I'm armed, I'm trained, and I have the suspect under visual surveillance, but I need county sheriff, state police, and federal agents en route immediately. This is related to an ongoing federal investigation. The calm authority in Sarah's voice was beautiful. No panic, no fear, just a federal prosecutor doing her job. Linda, meanwhile, was having a complete meltdown outside our window. Her flashlight beam was erratic, bouncing off trees and walls like a disco ball operated by someone having a seizure. She was muttering to herself about HOA rights and property inspections while attempting to commit multiple felonies. Our security system captured every word, every action, every moment of her criminal enterprise in action. 6 different camera angles, perfect audio quality, motion-activated lighting that illuminated her face clearly enough for a mugshot. Tom was positioned 200 feet away with his own camera, documenting everything from a safe distance. Maria was in her car at the end of our driveway, ready to block any escape route. 3 other neighbors were recording from their own properties, ensuring multiple witness perspectives. When the first sheriff's deputy arrived, sirens off, lights off, professional stealth approach, Linda was still trying to pry open our kitchen window. She was so focused on her breaking and entering project that she didn't notice law enforcement surrounding her until Deputy Martinez announced his presence. "Ma'am, step away from the window and place your hands where I can see them." Linda's response was pure panic and entitlement. This is HOA business. I have every right to inspect this property. These people are violating community standards. Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property with burglary tools. You're under arrest. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut in the pre-dawn darkness was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in 3 years. But Linda wasn't done incriminating herself. As Deputy Martinez read her rights, she kept talking, providing a complete confession without being asked a single question. I'm the HOA president. I have master keys. These people don't belong in this neighborhood. Someone has to protect property values. Every word was recorded. Every statement was witnessed. Every confession was admissible in federal court. Linda Patterson had just talked herself into a federal prison sentence while providing the prosecution with everything they needed to convict her on every charge. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. Thursday, exactly 48 hours after Linda's arrest made the front page of 3 local newspapers. The community center had never seen anything like it. 150 residents packed into a space designed for 50, with local TV crews setting up cameras and reporters checking their microphones like they were covering a presidential debate. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with burnt coffee from the ancient percolator in the corner, while folding chairs creaked under the weight of a community that had finally reached its breaking point. Channel 7 News had positioned cameras at 3 angles. The local newspaper had sent their crime reporter. Someone was even live streaming to Facebook for neighbors who couldn't fit inside. Linda arrived 20 minutes late, having posted $50,000 0 bail with assets that were about to be frozen by federal seizure warrants. She looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Disheveled hair, clothes that screamed, "I got dressed in a jail cell," and the kind of wild-eyed desperation that makes people cross to the other side of the street. Her public defender, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, kept whispering urgent advice that Linda was clearly ignoring. Smart lawyers know when to keep their clients quiet. Linda, apparently, had never met a microphone she couldn't incriminate herself with. Tom called the meeting to order with the kind of authority that comes from 40 years of legal practice. We're here to address the systematic harassment, criminal behavior, and financial fraud that has been perpetrated against this community by its former HOA president. The word former hit Linda like a physical blow. She shot to her feet, pointing an accusatory finger at the crowd. You people have no idea what I've done for this neighborhood. I've protected property values. I've maintained standards. I've committed multiple federal crimes, Sarah interrupted, rising from her seat with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her federal prosecutor voice cut through the room like a sword through butter. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Mitchell, and I'm here in my official capacity to inform this community about the criminal enterprise that has been operating under the guise of HOA governance. The room went dead silent except for the whir of camera equipment and the scratch of reporters' pens. Sarah opened her folder with theatrical precision. Mrs. Patterson stands accused of violating the civil rights of disabled veterans under federal hate crime statutes. She faces environmental destruction charges for poisoning our water supply. She's been indicted for tax evasion, embezzlement, and racketeering. Each charge hit Linda like a physical blow. Her face cycled through several interesting color changes while her lawyer looked like he was calculating how fast he could escape through the nearest exit. The evidence includes 127 hours of security footage, 47 documented incidents of harassment, recorded confessions to multiple crimes, and financial records showing $340,000 0 in unreported income from property manipulation schemes. Maria stood up from the back of the room, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fed half the town for 20 years. Linda, you tried to steal our homes, you poisoned our neighbor's water, you threatened a disabled veteran who served our country. The crowd's anger was palpable, a low rumble of voices that grew louder with each revelation. But Linda, in her infinite wisdom, decided this was the perfect moment for her final public meltdown. He doesn't belong in this neighborhood, she screamed, pointing directly at me. None of them do. This is supposed to be for decent people, not welfare cases and freeloaders who bring down property values. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial carpet. Sarah smiled that shark smile again and pulled out her phone. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Patterson has just provided, on camera, in front of 150 witnesses, a perfect confession to federal hate crimes based on disability discrimination. She looked directly at Linda with the kind of professional satisfaction that federal prosecutors live for. That statement will be Exhibit A in your hate crime trial, Mrs. Patterson. Disability-based harassment carries a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison. Linda's complete breakdown was immediate and spectacular. She started screaming about conspiracies, about how everyone was against her, about how she was just trying to protect the neighborhood from undesirable elements. Every word was recorded, every rant was witnessed, every confession was admissible in federal court. Deputy Martinez, who'd been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward with a second set of handcuffs. Mrs. Patterson, you're under arrest for violation of your restraining order, making terrorist threats and additional civil rights violations. As they led her away in handcuffs, Linda's final words to the community were a masterpiece of self-incrimination. You'll all regret this when your property values crash because of these people. The room erupted in applause that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Sarah closed her folder with satisfaction. Justice isn't always swift, but it's always thorough. 5 years in federal prison, $200,000, 0 cents in restitution, permanent registration as a civil rights violator. Linda's fate was sealed by her own words, captured on camera, witnessed by 150 neighbors, and broadcast on 3 local news stations. But the real victory wasn't Linda's downfall. It was what our community built from the ashes of her corruption. The HOA was dissolved by emergency vote that same night, replaced by a voluntary neighborhood association focused on mutual aid instead of mutual destruction. Tom was elected president unanimously, and his first official act was establishing a victim assistance fund using Linda's seized assets. Property values, they actually increased. Turns out, when national news covers your community's successful fight against corruption, people want to live there. Who knew that standing up to bullies was good for real estate? Maria expanded her diner into an official community center, with meeting rooms, legal aid services, and a coffee pot that never runs empty. The smell of fresh brewed coffee and Maria's famous apple pie has become the unofficial scent of neighborhood democracy. Jake's transformation was the most beautiful part of the whole story. The woodworking therapy program that started in our adapted workshop has grown into the Pinewood Falls Veterans Workshop, a full-scale operation that helps disabled veterans across 3 counties learn new skills, process trauma, and build community. Sarah and I are stronger than ever. Shared trauma either breaks relationships or forges them into something unbreakable. Turns out, fighting federal crimes together is excellent marriage therapy. Sarah's work on our case led to her promotion as head of a new federal task force focused on community harassment and civil rights violations. The social good initiative that grew from our fight has exceeded every expectation. The Pinewood Falls Veteran Scholarship Fund, funded entirely by Linda's seized assets, has sent 12 veterans to college in the past 3 years. The legal clinic that Tom and Sarah established provides free representation for harassment victims across the state. Final knowledge nugget: document everything, build community alliances, and never underestimate the power of letting bullies expose themselves completely. Federal prosecutors love cases where the defendant provides their own evidence. 1 year later, our community barbecue at the ranch draws over 200 people. Veterans, legal professionals, neighbors, and families gather to celebrate what happens when good people refuse to be intimidated by petty tyrants. The sound of children laughing mingles with adults sharing stories of victory over corruption. Jake stands at his workshop demonstrating woodworking techniques to a group of young veterans while the smell of grilling burgers drifts across the property. His chronic pain hasn't disappeared, but his purpose has been renewed. From isolated victim to community leader. That's the kind of transformation that makes federal prosecutors believe in justice. The legal precedent from our case has been cited in 17 similar prosecutions across the country. Linda's name has become a cautionary tale in legal circles, while Jake's has become an inspiration. 3 other HOA corruption schemes have been exposed following media coverage of our story. Tom, now 76, still practices law part-time, specializing in cases where big institutions try to crush little people. Experience beats youth every time, he says, especially when experience has good documentation. Sarah's federal task force has investigated 23 cases of systematic community harassment, resulting in 31 convictions and over $2 million, 0 cents in restitution for victims. The Patterson case taught us that individual harassment often hides systematic criminal enterprise, she explains to law enforcement training seminars. As the sun sets over our ranch, casting long shadows across the property that Linda tried so hard to steal, I'm reminded that home isn't just where you live. It's where you're safe to heal, surrounded by people who understand that justice delayed is not justice denied. Our neighboring county recently asked for help with a similar situation. An HOA president who's targeting elderly residents with financial harassment. Sarah's task force is already investigating, and the Pinewood Falls Veterans Workshop is ready to provide support. The fight for justice never really ends, but that's okay. We've learned that standing up to bullies isn't just about winning, it's about building something better in their place. Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story. We read every one, and Sarah's task force investigates the ones that show criminal patterns. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of underdogs beating corrupt systems, because sometimes justice wears handcuffs and speaks with a federal prosecutor's voice. Links in the description for free legal resources, veteran support organizations, and information about reporting civil rights violations. Remember, you're never as powerless as bullies want you to believe.